They don't fall in love. They select. And the most disturbing part isn't the coldness, it's the precision. As long as you believe it was destiny, connection, or inexplicable chemistry, someone may have analyzed your every detail, how a predator observes its prey before attacking. The smile, the hidden lack, the poorly healed emotional wounds. Nothing is random, nothing is spontaneous. There is calculation where you saw intensity. There is strategy where you felt passion. And today, you will understand exactly how this choice works, because psychopaths don't fall in love. They identify, they study, they mirror, and when they finally approach, they already know everything they need to take control, absolute emotional. Love for most people is vulnerability, it's delivery, it's risk, but for a psychopathic mind, love is a tool, it's access, it's infiltration. There are no butterflies in your stomach. There is no anxiety about the unanswered message. There is no fear of losing. What exists is real-time behavioral analysis. It is accurate reading of body language. It is mapping your emotional needs. They don't feel what you feel, but they understand perfectly how you feel, and that's exactly what makes them dangerous. Psychopathy is not synonymous with explosive violence as in the movies. She often wears charm, stability, and almost hypnotic self-confidence. People like this tend to be described as intense, magnetic, engaging. They make you feel seen as never before, special, chosen. But the question almost no one asks is, why you? What was it about you that caught so much attention? Your empathy, your need for validation, your abandonment story? Psychopaths have something called empathy, highly developed cognitive. They don't feel your pain, but they can map it with surgical precision. And when they find out where it hurts, they don't attack immediately. They build trust first. They create dependence. They offer exactly what I always wanted to receive, until control is consolidated. Relationships like this don't start with obvious signs of danger. They start with unusual intensity, accelerated connection, premature promises, a feeling of, I finally found someone different. And maybe they actually found it. Someone different in the most dangerous way possible. If you've ever felt like someone seemed too normal, maybe this video will help you understand why. Why? Because over the next few minutes you will discover how someone's mind works. It turns love into a strategy, intimacy into a tool, and people into emotional targets. And perhaps, as you listen, some faces will begin to emerge in your memory. But before we go any further, there is something that needs to be answered. How can someone simulate passion so perfectly, without feeling it at all? Nothing. The answer begins with an uncomfortable truth. To the psychopathic mind, relationships are not emotional encounters. These are strategic operations. Does not exist chance. There is behavioral reading. From the first contact, as you try to cause a good impression, this person is already analyzing micro-expressions, speech patterns, insecurities disguised in jokes, and the way your eyes react when you talk about past. They observe before acting. Unlike most people who let themselves be carried away by the emotion of the moment, the psychopath maintains absolute internal control. He feels excitement from the power of influence, not for the connection. Your brain doesn't respond to emotional bonding in the same way that your brain does. Yours. Studies show that individuals with psychopathic traits have a reduction in activation of areas linked to emotional empathy. They understand the pain, but they don't feel it. And that changes everything. Because when someone doesn't feel emotional empathy, but has cognitive empathy sharpened, a rare and dangerous profile emerges. Someone who understands their emotions without being affected by them. It's like an emotional surgeon. It identifies where your needs are, your fears of abandonment, your need for validation. And instead of judging, he offers exactly what you've always been looking for. But not out of love, by strategy. The first stage is usually engaging. Conversations too deep for too little time. Almost magical similarities. Identical tastes, aligned values, the feeling of like mirroring. The psychopath adapts his personality temporarily to reflect yours. It shapes itself. Adjust opinions. amplifies affinities. You feel connection. He feels an advantage. While you relax emotionally, it collects data. Observe how you react to silence, how you respond to compliments, how you deal with frustrations. Everything becomes information. And information for him means power. It's not about sharing life. It's about accessing points of control. The absence of genuine attachment allows something few people can do, turn off feelings when necessary. If at any point you show resistance or excessive autonomy, behavior can change almost imperceptibly, surge a slight coldness, a subtle withdrawal of attention. It's not impulsive, it's calculated, because he has already realized that you fear losing, and now he tests that fear. This pattern creates a cycle of emotional reward and scarcity. Psychologically, this activates the same circuits involved in addiction in the victim's brain. Small doses of affection interspersed with detachment increase emotional dependence. You start looking for that intense version from the beginning again. That overwhelming connection. But that version was never spontaneous. It was built. And while you try to regain what you believe to be love, he watches how much you are willing to adapt so as not to lose the relationship. The more you invest emotionally, the more predictable it becomes, and predictability facilitates control. This is where many confuse intensity with passion. The psychopath can demonstrate security, coolness in conflicts, and even an apparent emotional maturity. But behind furthermore, there is an absence of real guilt. If lying is convenient, he lies. If you promise useful, he promises. There is no internal conflict, just strategic decision. The question that begins to emerge is uncomfortable. If love for him is a tool, then what happens when you stop being useful? To understand what happens when you stop being useful, you need to look inside the psychopathic brain. It's not just learned behavior. There is a structural difference and functional. Neuroimaging studies show that individuals with psychopathic traits have less activity in the amygdala, the region responsible for processing fear and emotional empathy. While your brain reacts to the suffering of others with discomfort automatic, theirs responds neutrally. They understand the pain, but they don't try it. Additionally, there are changes in the connection between the amygdala and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, area linked to moral decision-making and guilt. This means that the emotional brake that prevents most people from hurting someone else simply doesn't operate in the same way. It's not that they don't know what's right or wrong. They know. But this knowledge does not generate internal weight. It's information, not feeling. Here, a crucial distinction emerges. Emotional empathy versus cognitive empathy. Empathy emotional makes you feel someone's sadness as if it were your own. Cognitive empathy allows you to rationally understand what the other person feels without absorbing it. Psychopaths, they often have highly developed cognitive empathy, can predict reactions, anticipate behaviors, and adapt speeches with almost mathematical precision. It's like playing emotional chess. You move a piece based on feeling. They respond with strategy. When you're in a relationship, what seems like intensity may just be refined observation. They analyze patterns, how long it takes you to respond messages, how your tone changes when you're insecure, what stories from the past still arouse emotion. Every detail becomes behavioral data, and data feeds control. Without genuine attachment, the psychopathic mind does not panic at the possibility of lose someone. The fear of abandonment, so common in human relationships, simply does not, it feels the same way. This creates a silent advantage. While you fear the end, they calculate probabilities. As you try to resolve conflicts, they evaluate cost-benefit. Relationships in this context become games of influence, and games only continue as long as they are interesting. Research also indicates a lower physiological response to emotional stress. Situations that would make the average person anxious, such as confrontations, accusations, or crises, can be faced with almost disconcerting calm. This apparent stability is often interpreted as maturity, but often it's just a lack of involvement, real emotional. This coldness creates a dangerous asymmetry. You argue trying to save the relationship. They argue trying to maintain the upper hand. If something here starts to make sense to you, stick with it until the end. What's next? It can change the way you observe people. Because there is another disturbing point: the capacity for compartmentalization. Psychopaths can separate behaviors without internal conflict. They can show affection for morning and lie in the afternoon without experiencing guilt. They can promise exclusivity while evaluate other possibilities. There is no emotional noise interfering with decisions. This means that when you fail to meet their strategic needs, admiration, validation, status, control, connection loses function, and when something loses function, loses value. There is no deep mourning. There is substitution. But before the disposal takes place, there is an even bigger phase, is powerful and seductive. One stage in which you feel unique, irreplaceable, almost chosen by destiny. If their brain doesn't feel love like yours, then why does the initial phase feel so perfect? The initial phase seems perfect because it is not spontaneous. It is built. Before you even realize you are involved, the psychopath has already begun the process of strategic idealization. This is the most seductive and, paradoxically, the most artificial stage. He's not just getting to know you. You are shaping your own image to become exactly what you are looking for. This is where deep mirroring comes in. He repeats his opinions with slight variations, shows intense interest in your dreams, share stories that seem incredibly aligned with your pain. See you have suffered abandonment, he talks about absolute loyalty. If you fear betrayal, he condemns infidelity with theatrical conviction. If you value emotional connection, he presents himself as someone different from everyone else. Nothing is a coincidence. Everything is calculated adaptation. This phase is usually accompanied by something known as love bombing, an avalanche of attention, constant messages, premature statements, and future plans, accelerated. Intensity creates the feeling of destiny. You feel like you found someone rare, someone who finally understands your deepest layers. But what you're seeing is not depth, it's performance. Psychologically, this excess validation activates reward circuits in the brain, similar to those stimulated by drugs. Dopamine, oxytocin, feeling of belonging. Your emotional system begins to associate that person with pleasure and security. At the same time, the speed of the connection reduces your critical sense. Do you trust before evaluating? Surrender before observing? And that's exactly what he wants. During this phase, the psychopath studies his limits, tests small boundaries, one subtle comment to gauge reaction, a delay calculated to observe insecurity. You show fear of losing, he registers. If he demonstrates emotional dependence, he expands positive stimuli. It's conditioning. As in behavioral experiments, alternating intense rewards with small scarcity doses increase attachment. When he responds quickly and then disappears for some hours, you feel anxiety. When he returns with redoubled affection, the relief reinforces the bond. Your brain learns that it needs that approval to stabilize itself. But while you get attached, he remains emotionally out of the game. There is no real vulnerability. It can reveal trauma, but in a controlled way. You can cry, but without exposure genuine. You can say, "I've never felt that way about anyone," even though you know you've already told same sentence before. The difference is in the intention. You seek connection. He seeks consolidation of power. And when this idealization reaches its peak, you feel chosen, single, special. This feeling is not accidental. Psychopaths understand that people want to be seen as exceptions. They want to believe that they awakened something new in the other. So they feed that narrative, create the illusion of that you are different from all who have come before. But in fact, you are occupying a functional position, the validation position, of admiration, of emotional supply, and when the function starts to fail, when you question, demand real reciprocity, or demonstrates excessive autonomy, the dynamic changes. The intensity decreases. The admiration becomes subtle criticism. Charm gives way to almost imperceptible coldness. The mask does not fall off abruptly. She slides. And this is when many victims fall into deep confusion. Why do they try to recover that perfect initial phase? They believe they did something wrong. What they need: love more, give in more, understand more. But the question that begins to echo is different. If that intense version was just a strategic construction, then what happens? When does the game stop being interesting? When the game stops being interesting, the change begins in silence. There is no immediate explosion. There is no dramatic announcement. There is calculated retraction. The intensity that previously seemed inexhaustible begins to fluctuate. Messages slow down. Plans' futures disappear. The look no longer holds the same admiration. And you feel it. Sit. That something has changed, even without being able to explain exactly what. This is the gradual discard phase. For the psychopath, relationships work as long as they provide something: validation, status, control, excitement, or practical utility. When the power supply starts to fail, whether because you questions inconsistencies, demands real emotional reciprocity, or simply stops being novelty, strategic interest weakens. And when interest weakens, the connection loses function. Without genuine attachment, there is no deep suffering. What do you interpret as crisis emotional? He interprets as operational cost. If maintaining you requires too much energy, is simpler to reduce investment. If someone more admiring, more available, or easier to influence, replacement takes place without internal conflict. This is where emotional asymmetry reveals itself brutally. You try to talk. He avoids it. You try to understand. He downplays it. Sudden coldness may appear. Veiled criticisms, subtle comparisons, small attacks on your self-esteem begin to appear. These are not explicit attacks. These are fine adjustments to power dynamics. Because even when discarding, he wants to maintain control. In some cases, disposal is abrupt, a cold, almost clinical breakup. No big explanations, no show of pain. In others, he keeps you as an option secondary, alternating proximity and distance to ensure there is still access, in case you need it again. This behavior creates deep confusion. You don't know if it's over or if there's still hope. And this uncertainty prolongs dependence. Psychologically, the human brain seeks closure. When the end is not clear, the mind tries to fill in gaps. You revisit memories, try to identify mistakes, take on blame that they are not yours. Do you believe it could have been different if you had loved more, understood more, given more? But the problem was never a lack of love. It was an excess of strategy on the other side. The psychopath does not experience grief like most people. It may even show sadness performative if it preserves social image or avoids suspicion. But internally, the replacement has already started even before the official end. While you were still trying to save the relationship, he was already evaluating new possibilities. And most disturbingly, there is no real remorse. If you lied, it was helpful. If he promised, it was convenient. If he got hurt, it was a functional consequence. The absence of guilt is not born of moral ignorance. It arises from the inability to feel the emotional weight of the pain caused. For you, the end seems devastating. For him, it feels like a transition. Some victims describe the feeling as if the person had suddenly turned off, as if that passionate intensity had evaporated. And, in a way, it evaporated. Even because it was never sustained by a genuine bond. It was maintained out of interest. And when the interest ends, the mask loses its need. The great irony is that many psychopaths return, not for love, but by test. Realize that they still exert influence. They may reappear with nostalgic messages or rehearsed statements of repentance. It's not reconnection. It's validation of power. The question that remains is inevitable. If someone manages to enter your life with calculated intensity, create dependence emotional, and leave without guilt, how many people around you are truly loving, and how many are just choosing? Perhaps the scariest thing is not that they exist. Perhaps the scariest thing is that they look normal. Psychopaths don't carry warning signs. They do not show constant coldness. don't live isolated in obvious shadows. Many occupy stable social positions, are charismatic, smart, persuasive, and above all, adaptable. They learn what they need to demonstrate. They learn how to smile in the right way, how to sustain eye contact, how to look vulnerable when necessary. Not because they feel the same way as you, but because they understood that emotions are gateways, and when the door opens, they enter. Throughout this video, you've seen that it's not about overly intense romance, not unlucky, emotional. This is a behavioral strategy combined with the absence of emotional empathy genuine. This is someone who understands love as a tool, not as a bond. This does not mean that every intense relationship is manipulation. Not all coldness indicates psychopathy. The human mind is too complex for dangerous simplifications. But it does mean that there is a specific type of person who doesn't love like you love, who doesn't suffer like you suffer, who doesn't feel guilt like you do. And this invisible difference creates a devastating advantage. What differentiates healthy relationships from strategic relationships is not just intensity. It is real emotional reciprocity. It's mutual vulnerability. It is the presence of guilt when there is error. It is the ability to be genuinely affected by the suffering of others. Psychopaths can imitate all of this, but imitation is not experience. Deep down, what sustains any healthy human bond is the ability to put oneself in someone else's shoes and feel something when doing so. When this capacity does not exist, there is just calculation, and calculus doesn't love it. You may never meet someone with psychopathic traits in your life. Maybe you already have found. Maybe you're still trying to understand a relationship that ended without coherent explanation. The goal here is not to create paranoia. It's creating awareness. Because recognizing patterns is not about living in distrust of everyone. It's about understanding that intensity is not proof of love. What too quick promises can hide give lack of depth. That whoever really feels demonstrates consistency throughout time, not just at the beginning. If this content made you think differently about the human mind, sign up. Here we explore what almost no one wants to see. And now I leave a question that may echo for a long time. When someone says they love you, is this person feeling something, or just choosing you as their next strategy? Because in the end, perhaps the greatest danger is not in the obvious darkness, but in what smiles, promises, and observes, in silence.